when Dr. King awakened the conscience of America as to how vile Jim Crow was, it was America that stepped forward and said, we're going to lock arms and march with you. So I look at things in a holistic, plainer, more simplistic approach, and it all goes back to the Constitution, and I stand and look for my direction based on that. That makes me a constitutionalist. And the fact that I don't believe you can be a constitutionalist and be anything other than a conservative, and you certainly cannot be if, as I said, you're raised in a Christian home, Christian philosophy, as I was.
Conservatism begins in the book of Genesis?
Conservatism, I believe, begins in the book of Genesis, and then moves forward from there. Conservatism. You look at and I'm going off topic here. But
well,
so,
let me bring you back in.
Bring you back from that.
We're jumping all over the place, and that's okay. And by the way, as in previous weeks, when you feel the Spirit move you, join in, and if you have questions, feel free. Okay, there we go.
Because he had taken me first.
Because he had driven
and
Mychal first.
He had asked.
And so he had all Mychal's answers.
And he knew he was able to put two and two together and come up with four and say, okay, he's bringing me here to the Dole. He's picking him up. He knew he's bringing you to the Dole, and he said, okay, I'm going to see if this guy thinks the same way as my buddy Mychal thought, because Mychal and I are on the same page.
Yeah, they were best friends, what I found out. They grew to be best friends.
Yeah, and that
I was a little less talkative in the car than Mychal, but but let me we were at the Civil Rights, the signing of the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And I agree with you. The rights did not materialize to black people by virtue of the act. The rights existed prior. And there were constitutional grounds already in place, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, certainly there, which should have been enough. They were not. So the question is then, what is the role of government in securing rights when other citizens are not maybe as willing to acknowledge them in their fellow citizens?
Government has how many delegated powers? How many delegated powers does the government have? Somebody. You're going to be a lawyer, young lady. How many? Well, yeah, you too, maybe, but the young lady behind you. How many delegated powers? Sir? How many? Delegated powers. How many?
Well, it's the 10th Amendment. I don't think that, and I don't know it.
Okay, so everybody has a homework assignment tonight. I'm not going to tell you. Government has only so many delegated powers. After that, everything else is left to the states. Unless government somehow miraculously is given an additional delegated power, which I argue there's no reason to, there are only so many. I have to be careful not to give the answer, and I've almost done it a couple times. There are only so many. Our founding fathers were not dummies. If you've read Madison, and if you've not read Madison, I strongly encourage you to read Madison. This was not an ignorant man. Washington, Franklin, these were not unlearned men. And when you read, they had a reason. They had a reason for setting forth this document as they did, because they had seen what took place in the country from whence they came, and they wanted to prevent and preserve us from that. Government has X number of responsibilities. That is what they should focus on. That is what they should attend to, and the rest should be left to the states. If the government is doing what it's supposed to do over here, the states are doing what they're supposed to do here, the courts are doing what they're supposed to do over here, and the third branch of government, which is Congress, is doing what it's supposed to do over here with the president and the courts, we don't need fear or be concerned that we are somehow going to be treated in a way that is inappropriate. And when and if that happens, there are measures in place to address that.
My question has to do with when those mechanisms at the state level do not work, which was the case throughout the early part of the 20th century.
But that, specific to that point, they did work. Because when Bull Connor stood on the steps in Arkansas, President Eisenhower federalized the National Guard and sent them in. That was a provision allowed for. When the people of America, when Dr. King awakened the mind, awakened the conscience of America, the people from other states went forward and began to pressure and call for an end. And when Johnson who was a Democrat, went to the Republican Everett Dirksen because the members of his own party would not help pass this act, it was the people of the states from which these men came that supported them ultimately in making this decision. Believe me, Everett Dirksen would have been less inclined, I think it's safe to say, to act as he did, and it's certainly open to debate, but I think he would have been less inclined to act as he did had the people of his state in lockstep said no. Having said that, we also, and I'm digressing for a moment, but we saw the change in George Wallace, and we saw a change in Strom Thurmond, so who knows what's possible. But all of that aside, there was a mechanism in place. And the people of the states, the representatives of the states, the people, they were encouraged by the people. The president, the one branch went to the other branch that has the state representatives. They talked, fought, and battled for this Civil Rights Act. And then it was passed, it became codified, and we had the beginning of what we have today, which can be debated. But there was a mechanism in place, and the states had overstepped their boundaries. Were doing things in the South that were wrong. My goodness, the KKK was founded December 24th, 1865, less than a year after the Civil War ended. On December 24th, that's Christmas Eve, by the Democrat Party. And their first grand wizard was Nathan Bedford Forrest, a Democrat, who they took great delight in. And it was they were founded for what reason? To terrorize, antagonize, hold down, and murder when necessary and or convenient Jews, Catholics, and blacks. Now that's the etymology of the progression to the need for, or the presumed need for, the Civil Rights Act. If I continue, I would say I look back now in hindsight, and it's only with hindsight that I look back and say maybe we really didn't need the act, because the mechanism was already in place. We needed adherence to that. And the document says all men are created equal. Certainly inalienable rights endowed to them to their creator. I say creator. I'm not going to omit it.
Well,
it was there.
It's interesting because the modern conservative movement did not support the signing of the act. Republicans, of course, did vote in large numbers in support of the Civil Rights Acts of the mid-'60s. But isn't this where we begin to see, actually the migration of blacks from the Republican Party began a little bit before this, but it certainly, this legacy is something that that the Republican Party has been living with for the decades since then. You smiled, so you know exactly where I'm going. In retrospect, well, let me rephrase the question.
I like the one in retrospect better if you were going where I thought you
were,
but that's okay.
Wouldn't it have been better for conservatives to get on board? And then maybe we would see different political, I guess the layout, the political terrain would be a little bit different today.
At the time of the time the Civil Rights Act was signed, 82% of black households were married, two-parent households. 40% of those were business owners. Now, it can be argued that all of that was necessary because blacks were being held down and they were being oppressed and yada, 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 so they had to start their own business. And yeah, you know what? I don't care. Because they're saying that blacks are being held down today and they're not starting businesses. So if they're being held down and started a business, I say, yay, you started a business. America works. Let me come back to context. There's always someone waiting to exploit a malcondition. And that's a word that I've just invented. A malcondition is a bad condition. There's always someone waiting to exploit that. Frederick Douglass addressed it. Booker T. Washington addressed it when Booker T. said that he determined he would never allow anyone to make him hate. And if you look at Booker T., this whole hate and resentment and bitterness, he was a slave, for goodness sakes. And the white people of Tuskegee joined him, gave him money, gave him equipment, dug in the trenches beside him to build Tuskegee at a time that we were told today that wasn't happening. My point is this. Somewhere along the line, whether it was the Southern strategy that people argue that was the reason for it, or whether it was the fact that when Dr. King was imprisoned and the promise was made to his wife that he would get out, but at the same time there were backdoor promises being made, and it was understood that the president at that time would not be able to speak out harshly against the unjust imprisonment of Dr. King, or else they wouldn't let him out. In fact, he might die there, and a promise had been made to Mrs. King, so he had to sort of dance the fine line to get him out safely. Who knows what the real truth is? What we do know is that the signing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 gave way to the Voting Rights Act in 65, which gave way to the Act of Affirmative Action by Mr. Nixon in 1968, which gave way preceding that to the Great Society Initiative.